Okay, I think we're streaming. So first of all, welcome everyone to our now already 20th critical dialogue of reconciliation on reconciliation. A big anniversary for us in a way. We've just been discussing how long we've been doing this for, and it's I think in the third or fourth year. Um, for everyone who's here for the first time, my name is Lucia. I'm a member of Rodeemos el Diálogo, Embrace Dialogue, where I work mostly on the culture of dialogue. And for everyone who does not know Rodeemos, just very briefly, Rodeemos el Diálogo, or Embrace Dialogue, as we call it in English, is a transnational organization working on peace building through the culture of dialogue, or working on the peace process in Colombia through the culture of dialogue. We're not the only one organizing this space, so we're doing it in collaboration together with the Winchester Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace at the University of Winchester and the Oxford Network for Peace Studies, OxPeace in short. I'll post the links to the different organizations organizing this and our work into the chat, and also for everyone watching online on the YouTube live stream, I also posted there. So you can explore our work more, follow us, come to further events. In terms of Rodeemos el Diálogo as well, we do work in Colombia, where we work a little bit more on the ground as well. For example, in peace pedagogy, supporting youth-led projects as well, and also on the global level, we do events such as this one, so like this dialogue, a lot of academic events as well, but not just. And we always try to bring sort of the learnings from other parts of the world back to Colombia, but also show or try to share the knowledge that we get from our work in Colombia with other places and other organizations. This event specifically, so the critical dialogues, are here so that we get to invite practitioners, academic decision makers who work in one way or another in reconciliation to share their research, to share their insights, and kind of be able to kind of together open up a dialogue space with everyone. And even though usually the people who come are academics and are practitioners, we're really, really, really thankful for everyone who comes as a guest to the space. You're really making the space so special. So it doesn't matter what your background is. We're always excited to hear what thoughts get incited in the space, and everything you share is super valuable and really makes this dialogue so special to us. So thank you again for taking the time to join us. I think a little bit of just kind of ground rules. Like I said, this space is being recorded and streamed, so you will be able to watch it back later on YouTube as well. But I think that's pretty much it. So again, on behalf of Embrace Dialogue, the Center for Religion, Reconciliation and Peace at the University of Winchester and the Oxford Network for Peace Studies, welcome everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. André Gomez Suarez, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Religion, Reconciliation and Peace, a member of the OxPeace Steering Committee, and also the co-founder of Rodeemos el Diálogo. And he will convene today's dialogue, introduce our special guest, who we're very, very excited to have with us, and also first start by introducing you to the culture of dialogue and what it will mean for this dialogue today. André?
Thank you, Lucia. And thank you so much, Nick, for accepting this invitation. It's great to see new faces here and to see some other people who have participated in the past. It's really, really great to have this partnership with Winchester and with OxPeace. And in particular, we really believe in the principles and the values of the cultural dialogue of Rodeemos el Diálogo, and that's what we would like to share with you in this moment, so that we all in this space can dialogue. I'm checking. Is it okay? Can you listen to me okay without any problem? Okay. So the 6 principles that we would like to embrace you to have a really beautiful transformative space are the following. First, we believe in generosity. So we invite you to be fully present in this space, to try to suspend for a moment your own thinking about what's happening in the world and to focus on this space as such. Second, the principle of solidarity. We invite you to unleash your empathy to act with compassion as you are listening to the topics that we've been discussing in this space. The third principle is co-responsibility. We invite you to hold this space together. It depends on all of us to make it a really transformative space. The fourth principle is honestly. We invite you to speak from experience and to be humble to check where we are. The fifth principle is respect. We invite you to see your own reactions and to avoid judging what you've been listening to, whether it's right or wrong. Just, let's stay there. And finally, self-criticism. The last principle, that is not confuse your assumptions with reality and to try to see if there is something that you end up reassessing after what you have been listening and be transformed. So I think these are the principles that are gonna sort of sustain this dialogue today. We understand dialogue as a horizontal transformation that takes place in a stream of meaning that flows among and through and between us, as David Combe would say. So the invitation is to leave aside all patterns of interaction. This is not a seminar. This is a space for spontaneity. It's a space for us to try to think together, to share our memories, to share our experience, and to see where doing that from an honest perspective, following the principles that we have mentioned, take us to an unexpected place. So the structure of the dialogue today is the following. In the first 30 minutes, Nick and I, we will sort of have a two heads dialogue in a way. We will try to offer some food for thought. We will give some ideas, leave some ideas on the table. The idea is for you to listen, to see your own thought process unfolding, to please do not drop any question or any thoughts on the chat option yet, because the idea is that you only do that once we have opened the floor to see where your thought process has taken you. And then after those 30 minutes or so, we will open the floor for 45 minutes or so for you to come in and start bringing all that richness of your thought process into this conversation and to take us to an unexpected place. And then towards the end of it, we will listen to Nick here and there, and I will wrap up in the last 5 minutes with some food for thought for what is left on the table. So, you are aware that the idea is that when we open the floor, please turn your cameras on, please speak. The idea of a dialogue is that we want to hear your voice, as Lucia said, just be aware that this event is being live streamed. So without further ado, let me tell you who is our very special guest to this 20th Critical Dialogue on Reconciliation today. And we're really, really thrilled to have you, Nick. Dr. Nick Sherwood is a peace psychologist with expertise in conflict transformation, mental health, psychological support, and qualitative participatory research and assessment. He has a BA in psychology and political science from Christopher Newport University and an MA in anthropology of human rights from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. He's got recently a fantastic PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University. He has over 12 years of experience in mental health, peace building, and human rights, and he works in an academic and non-profit context to integrate mental health and psychological support in peace building processes during and after conflict. Currently, he is a visiting scholar at George Mason University Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution, and the well-being expert at the Parachute People, the mental health psychological support advisor at Think Peace Learning and Support Hub at the Mary Hawk Center for Reconciliation. His professional mission is to support peace-building practitioners to become happier, healthier, safer, and more sustainable throughout their life, which is great, Nick, really. He also conducts participatory action community-based research on trauma healing and resilience, building within post-conflict settings, centering the needs and experience of local populations. So, as you can see, we couldn't be more luckier today to have this incredible conversation on insider reconcilers and well-being. So Nick, let's start. Because I remember sending the invitation to some people and they were getting back to me saying, what's insider reconcilers? What's that? Sounds like science fiction. So I think we should start with the basics. Could you tell us, what do you mean by insider reconcilers?
Sure. So I'm talking about a very specific type of person, a conflict actor. The idea was first proposed by Paul Ware and Jean-Paul Lederach in 1991, who were writing about insider partials in Central America. And what they were really interested, this is in the Journal of Peace Research, what they were really interested in were folks who were both from within a given conflict context and were connected to forces outside of the context and were working on mediating, arbitrating, building peace, resolving conflicts within this context. So this idea of the insider partial, we'll get to the reconciler part in a second. The insider partial really bucked at this idea that we needed third-party neutral interveners who would come into a conflict context, into violent conflict, kind of do their thing, mediate, and then get out of Dodge. When the insider partial idea was starting to get played with, Jean-Paul Lederach, Paul Ware, and then others started noticing, well, actually, no, these insiders are deeply embedded within their cultural context. In many cases, they were born and grew up and have lived in this conflict context. So they hold and bring with them cultural practices. They understand the flavor of the social groups that they're a part of. And so what they're really adept at is marrying with the right support, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They're really good at marrying conflict theories, peace-building theories about how to resolve and transform violent conflict, and funneling that through their unique psycho-cultural spiritual lens. So that's kind of the backdrop here. In the years since 91, organizations like the UNDP, USIP, other large-scale peace-building institutions were really interested in how mediation actors, specifically insider mediators, so again, we've got insider partials, now insider mediators, the role that insiders play in mediation processes. Recently, since 2017-ish, my old boss and now partner in crime, Antti Pintikainen, who's the director of Mary Hoke Center for Reconciliation and has a long history, prolific history as a reconciliation mediation practitioner. Antti and Simon Keyes were toying with this idea that if we've got insider partials as the umbrella term, and we have insider mediators as a flavor of this larger term, maybe there's an insider that facilitates reconciliation work. And maybe the insider reconciler is different from other forms of insiders. And so when I started the PhD at Carter School in 2019, Antti and I met kind of by happenstance at a speaker event. Roger McGinty actually came and talked to the Carter School, and I have long been obsessed with the mental health of peace-building practitioners. That's kind of how I fell into that, as a whole other story. But Antti and I got to talking, and he was like, well, I'm the new reconciliation guy. I started the PhD the same semester that he started working as a research professor at the Carter School. And we both kind of jived and realized that we were both really interested in what the experiences of insiders were. He said, hey, I've got this idea of insider reconcilers. I'm not a researcher. I don't know how to go about understanding this. So that's kind of where I stepped in. Quite simply defined, insider reconcilers are individuals who are members to or deeply connected to one or more sides of a conflict context, and they are supporting, facilitating, leading, doing reconciliation work within the conflict, the context that they're from. Reconciliation, as I'm defining it here, and reconciliation, I want to say, is a super, I'm sure your other speakers have talked about this, can be a super weird, sticky, tough term. In some contexts, you do not need to be reconciling people. It is not ethical. In some contexts and in some cultures, reconciliation is very much part of what needs to be happening. So I'm talking in this case, defining reconciliation as bringing people together after violence has occurred. And I'm talking mostly about direct violence. We want to bring Galtung into this, but after violence has occurred in a community, reconciliation happens when you bring people together after that violence has happened, and you bring them together to forge new relationships, get along, etc. Peaceful coexistence, mutual interdependence, as Fanny Du Toit would say. So the insider reconciler is usually, they're usually a victim survivor in this conflict. In many cases, they've lost friends, family members, wives, husbands, children to the conflict. Judith Herman, who's my favorite, probably my favorite scholar of all time, she and other psychologists talked about this idea of a survivor's mission, so that people who have survived trauma, in some cases, they try to transform the world around them politically, socially, because they feel called to after their traumatic event. A lot of insider reconcilers have experienced sort of the darkness of what violent conflict can bring and have taken a stand to say, no, actually, I'm going to try to bring light into this space. What else? Yeah, so the term wounded healer is very much part of the insider reconciler survivor's mission. Based off of my dissertation research, some of the other characteristics of insider reconcilers, they're very intelligent. I want to be clear that I'm not talking of like a Western IQ intelligence. They're very adept at moving through social spaces. They're in many cases deeply charismatic. They display very high levels of wisdom. Wisdom is what you build after lots and lots of experience in your life. It's the intelligence that comes from being alive. And so insiders, yeah, they have a high amount of soft skills, so they're really good at working with people. Often, I would say, test high in altruism, humility. Hardiness is another big term that I love in the psychology literature, which kind of vaguely talks about your ability to sort of create buffers against the stressors in your lives.
Sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you, but I
Yeah.
was thinking, listening to you, and I could not stop thinking of Berta Fries, who is one of the people who we invited to these critical dialogues on reconciliation. Actually, it was, I think, within the first 7 that we did, if I'm correct in my memory, and she's pretty much this insider reconciler that you are talking about, because she was victim of the FARC, of a terrorist attack of the FARC in Colombia. And she was talking about a really incredible program that she has created that is called Transformative Encounters. So she's gone into this crusade as the wounded healer, as you mentioned, of going and changing the reality around her. And she went and started this process of reconciliation first with the FARC, with the commanders of the FARC who ordered the attack, but at the same time working with the victims. And so she has started doing these incredible transformative encounters that first engage with the FARC on their own, then with the victims on their own, and now is bringing victims and perpetrators together to try to think about, like this sort of pathway to reconciliation. And as I was listening to you, you've been saying it's charismatic, there's this wisdom, there is all these very intelligent, and I love the way how you describe that intelligence, the intelligence of being alive and being a survivor. Right. I wanted to ask you if you sort of can think of another example, you probably don't need to give names if you don't want, but like an example in a particular scenario where you've seen someone doing something similar that sort of helps us put it into a personalize the whole thing.
Perfect. Yeah. So first, this idea of intentional encounters, paving the way to reconciliation. Nurit Schnabel, who's a faculty member, I think at Tel Aviv University or Hebrew University, she's doing very similar work, or was, I don't know the status of it, with Israelis and Palestinians. So that model of an insider bringing groups together through intentional encounters, this is something that has happened in a wide variety of contexts. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. Other examples, so when I was raised in the American South, Tennessee, and I've lived all over Alabama, Georgia, etc. For the US citizens on the call, or folks who are aware of the US context, the American South is a very complicated place. We have a very deep, complicated history of racism and sexism and slavery and all of that. When I was living in Athens, Georgia, in the summer of 2020, we had the murder of George Floyd, and America was kind of on fire. We had protests and riots in the far left and the far right. There was potential for escalation of violence. And I was in the South through most of that, and this was also during COVID, so it was kind of a crazy time. In Athens, Georgia, there were anti-racist activists who were fine using nonviolent methods of protest bordering on violent. And again, I never want to be the one to tell someone how to protest. That's not my job. And I don't want to claim moral superiority there. What insider reconcilers were doing in Athens is they were deeply connected to the anti-racist activists and the business leaders, the business owners in the community, more conservative professors, people that were definitely more on the politically right side. And what they were trying to do was bring people together through like open houses and public forum discussion. These insider reconcilers are not, and I want to put this into the definition as well. Insider reconcilers does not mean they work for the UN or they're a professor or whatever. Insider reconcilers oftentimes are unacknowledged, unofficial actors that are working in their own backyards. And part of the idea of the term is that I'm very much trying to open who is called a peace builder. We have an idea of like, oh, you go into humanitarian zones and you are a peace builder and you've got your little master's degree and you're whatever. That's cool, but people of all walks of life, stripes, backgrounds, areas of expertise, age, gender identity, all of that, all of these people can and are often peace builders and reconcilers in their own communities. So one example is bridge building across political and racial lines in Athens, Georgia. A second, Jasmine, thank you. So do I. The second example that I would use was in Kenya. One of the grant programs that Mary Hook Center for Reconciliation and a few of our partner organizations have been working on is it's called Building Peace and Trust in Communities throughout the Horn of Africa. A couple of years ago, I went to Kenya, fall of 2020, and we convened a group of mental health professionals and mental health workers and peace builders working in their own communities in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Kenya, Somalia. And we were running, it was a co-creation workshop. So we're trying to figure out how to kind of merge MHPSS, mental health approaches to peace building. Pretty much everyone who was in the room either was, one individual in particular is from Somalia. Her family members are part of the Al-Shabaab network, which is often the case in Somalia because they've, a lot of these families are super big. And so you've got people in the same family from all over. What this individual was doing was trying to bring in current Al-Shabaab folks with other family members and other old. I have a fire alarm going off. Give me one quick second. So sorry. Give me one quick second.
the beauties of online dialoguing. Let's hope that there's nothing serious happening to Nick.
I maybe have a question for the participants. Did you guys need to put in a passcode when you were joining the Zoom session? Because I have a couple of people messaging me that they need a passcode to be able to get in.
No, the Eventbrite link was showing us starting at 5, so the Zoom link wasn't working till 5. I only got in because you posted it on the chat, the WhatsApp chat. So
okay. I sent another, so I realized that some people must be struggling, so I sent another
you sent it,
email
okay.
as well. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. No, got in straight away. Okay. Huh. Okay. So a mixed experience. Okay.
Okay, that was super weird. It just went off. Our whole apartment building just had fire alarms. I don't know if that was a drill. Anyway, I'm back. It's great to see all of y'all. We're gonna roll with it. So yeah, this individual in Somalia was working to basically convert folks out of Al-Shabaab by bringing them into contact with their former childhood friends, family members, and sort of explaining to them in a non-threatening way, this organization that you're a part of, that in some communities does provide social services, is a terrorist organization. And we've got to get you out of that. Those are two examples. When I'm giving examples throughout this conversation, wait, did that go? Yeah, when I'm giving examples, I'm gonna try my best to kind of cover as many global conflict.
Nick, stopping you there for a sec, because I think those two examples are brilliant. Let me get you into this question that I think is really important again for this dialogue. And you have already started saying that you were convening this workshop of mental health practitioners and bridge builders. And it seems, that because of the lack of an acknowledgement of the work that these people do, probably they are in a more vulnerable situation. And I guess that's the reason why you've been working on well-being. So why don't you tell us a bit more now, when we are thinking about this process of reconciliation and inside Reconcilers, why you're starting to pay attention to well-being, and why is it important, and what do you mean by well-being?
Great. Super important question. So first, a little bit about how I got to the question of the well-being of peace builders in general, but specifically insiders. Early in my training, in my undergrad, started taking clinical psychology classes and became obsessed with this idea of trauma and resilience, not just as things that show up in a therapist's office, but as forces that shape our whole worldviews and lives. As I moved through my master's, finishing my undergrad and getting into my master's, I noticed a lot of the literature, and I'm quick to add, it was very Western, white psychology, was focusing on how survivors and victims of human rights abuses react to human rights abuses, to violence. What I never saw in the literature was how people who were trying to stop this stuff from happening, where was the research on them? Because from my perspective, I'm like, so they have survived human rights abuses. And in addition to the stressors that causes, they're also trying to do something to stop it. Because we have to understand, being a peace builder is a stressful thing. That's a stressful job, right? Often underpaid, often under-resourced, thankless, etc. So I started thinking even then, like, okay, this is a double whammy, and no one's really talking about it. And that became kind of my haunting question. And for the folks in the audience who are either scholars or interested in toying with ideas, I hope you find an idea that you become obsessed with and becomes your life's mission, because that is very much what happened with me. And I never expected that I would be the mental health of peace builders guy, but here I am. What is well-being? In super simple terms, having well-being means that you have the resources to meet the various challenges of life. Life is stressful, it's challenging. To have well-being means that you're engaging in a set of processes, is a big word that I like to use. Kind of antiquated views of health is a stasis, it's a state. If you have your blood pressure here, you're healthy. If you eat these foods, you're healthy. I think health and well-being are processes that we engage in over longer periods of time, because if you say someone is healthy because they have X blood pressure or whatever, I think that the person who's allowed to make that claim has a lot of power in deciding who is healthy and who is unhealthy, which I'm just not sure. I don't know. That's never really sat right with me. Well-being, as I understand it, yeah, you've got the resources to meet the various challenges of life. I break down well-being into specific dimensions, and the 5 that I look at are physical, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and social. And I don't want to get caught up in what those are and what those mean. I'm happy to dive more into that. But the big point being, folks in the social work field, in psychology, in counseling, and health sciences understand that well-being is not just what happens to our body. It's not just diet, nutrition, exercise, and sleep, and whatever else. It's the types of relationships that we have in our lives that give us meaning. It's our spiritual or religious practice. It is the types of emotions that we feel on a day-to-day basis. The reason I use well-being rather than mental health or mental illness is because mental health and mental illness are often super stigmatized, depending on the cultural context that you're in. I mean, even in the United States, it's starting to get better. But even in the United States, I mean, I think about my parents' generation, seeing a therapist is like not something that they do. Like, they don't want to admit that they have mental health problems, right? And I think that the current younger generations are doing a little bit better about reducing that stigma. But what I've found is that well-being is a term that a lot of people feel pretty safe discussing. I also want to be very clear. I am not a certified counselor or therapist, so I cannot, go in and ethically do counseling or therapy with someone. But what I can do is workshops that promote well-being, or facilitations, or well-being coaching, stuff like that.
It also seems, Nick, it also seems that it's more inclusive, isn't it? It seems this well-being somehow is connected to precisely this thing that you were talking about, of the wisdom of the people in the different contexts in which they exist. Because if it's connected beyond the body, it's connected to the context, the family relations, the connection with the territory, all of that well-being means like a healthy ecosystem. And I guess it stops like the reductionism that has been heavily criticized, that sometimes the West tries to impose in other contexts as the psychological, sort of positive environment of. Is that the case?
Yeah, I should think of how to best respond to this. The well-being concept has been, I mean, it was picked up in the mental health world kind of a generation ago. Positive psychologists, and I very much consider myself part of the positive humanistic tradition. Positive psychologists really were pushing this idea that rather than looking at reducing symptoms, reducing presentations of trauma, anxiety, depression, whatever, that we need to be looking at what promotes human contentment and flourishing, transcendence, self-actualization, if you want to bring Maslow into it. Well-being to me has always felt like a holistic, integrative idea, which is very much not reductionistic, right? Also the cool thing about well-being is as an umbrella term, as an integrative term, it hinges both on, the things that we're doing right in our lives, but also there is room in the space for a lot of different ways of how to conceptualize health and mental health and well-being and all that. My early work I was managing a clinical medical psychology lab in my master's. We were looking at HIV related stressors and how having HIV and experiencing social stigma predicted poorer health outcomes, specifically in Black women in the United States. And we're starting to do some work in Africa. Well-being is not just not having access to resources in your lives, it's also the social fields around. If you feel social stigma, allostatic theory, the theory of allostasis, this is like a big part of kind of the Nick Sherwood grand theory of well-being. Allostasis tells us that the stressors in our lives, as we internalize them, do present biologically within us. You can look at someone's telomere length, you can look at these other biomarkers, and it's the same thing in conflict contexts. You can see the stress of conflict, even if they're not, being bombed, and I'm not trying to be glib here, but even if they're not experiencing direct violence, structural and cultural violence can be detected in their bodily systems. If you live within a repressive regime, it's going to show up in your stress markers. Geronimus, I think is the name, a researcher here in the States proposed the weathering hypothesis, which looks specifically at Black Americans and how structural racism leads to poorer health outcomes. A lot of this research has not been replicated in conflict zones. But again, moving back to the insider reconciler discussion, we have insider reconcilers who are experiencing conflict and trying to do something about it. That's a lot of stress. And so that's where my dissertation picks up, which is the resilience aspect of insider reconcilers, because
I guess let me get into this. So I guess now you are getting into this interesting, because you've been telling us a lot about insider reconcilers. Mm-hmm. You're telling us us a lot about this well-being and the importance of well-being. Seems to me that you're then starting to connect healing and reconciliation processes as part of something that goes together. And you have this, from what I've seen here and there, you have this in some of the policy briefings that Lucia has shared here, have this idea of a healing-centered reconciliation process. So this is a really sort of fantastic way of sort of trying to move forward. So could you tell us a bit how you bring this synthesis together before we start opening the floor for people to start sharing their ideas, their thoughts, their questions?
Great. Healing-centered processes. Okay, I want everyone, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes for a second. And I want you to imagine a moment in your life where you felt healing. And I'm going to just leave it at that. When you felt healed, what did you feel in your body? What did you feel in your emotions? What did you feel in your mind? Was there a calmness, or was it energetic? What did healing feel like? And we can open our eyes now. Healing-centered processes, the way I understand it, is grounded in that experience. It's grounded in the moments in our lives that bring us. My version of healing is warm and it's calming. Other people's version of healing is dance and exuberation. What healing-centered processes do in conflict contexts, reconciliation processes, is they're trying to bring that restoration, rejuvenation, healing. Again, I'm talking around an experience because there's not really words to describe the experience. You just have to be there. Healing-centered processes, the idea is that it's not just passing just and equitable laws and policies, which we need to have in conflict contexts, but it's also ensuring that victims, survivors, perpetrators, practitioners, all people within a conflict context, the whole population undergoes some sort of healing process that helps them transform trauma, that helps them build resilience, that helps them promote well-being. that addresses the deep psychological and social wounds that happen when violence has occurred. Healing-centered processes, like I just said, are not just for the quote local population, the quote beneficiaries, all these words. The people leading healing-centered processes should also find healing as well. And so, yes, the insider reconciler is stressed out and they don't have the resources they need, and it's really tough. And another thing about insider reconcilers, they're often labeled enemies by one or more sides of the conflict, often their own communities, because their community members are like, wait, you're talking to the bad guy. Why are you talking to the bad guy? They've like done all these horrible things. And the insider says, well, in order for us as a society to move forward, I have to go do that. I have to. And I'm willingly putting myself through hell, through stress, through trauma, through threats of violence, whatever, to bring these people together. Healing-centered processes accounts for all of that. So that's sort of the idea. Now, what does that look like in practice? So when you're building reconciliation programs, you are centering trauma healing, trauma-informed programming, trauma-informed practice is very much part of this. Resilience-informed practice is a part of this. So accounting for how trauma shows up in spaces, both within the facilitation or within the program itself, and then in people's other parts of their lives. What I've tried to do with my dissertation and my general research program is bring an evidence-based approach of healing-centered processes. So scientifically studying, here's how a healing-centered process works. One day I would love to have the data that compares a healing-centered process and I don't want to say conventional, whatever process, put that data beside one another and see what has better longitudinal outcomes. Healing-centered processes are also grounded in local culture. This is where the anthropology of conflict and peace is super important, because different cultural contexts have different rites and rituals for, I see that celebration. I see that. Different cultural contexts and communities have different rites and rituals to engage in healing. I think of my colleagues in East Africa, where they're within their villages, if there has been an act of violence perpetrated, within or between clans, there are specific ways that they bring representatives of both or all clans together within a house. They cook a big dinner, and they basically put one person of the clan on trial, and it's seen as sort of I don't want to say a friendly trial, but and they talk and they talk and talk and talk and talk, and they talk until both sides have said everything they want to say about the grievance. And then after they've metered out, does there need to be a punishment? How do we move forward from this? They then throw a big celebration and bring together representatives of both of the clans. That is a healing ritual. Large-scale healing-centered processes need to account for that. They need to account for the wisdom and beauty of local culture and bring it into conversation with all of this. Trying to think, I'm not looking at my notes. Healing-centered processes, I will also say, I suspect, I could be wrong, my suspicion is that the peace-building field, peace and reconciliation field, is embarking into a mental health turn, a paradigm shift, mental health and psychosocial support paradigm shift. Healing-centered processes, if you were sitting down with someone in the 90s who was part of the liberal peace, idea, and I can go back to these journal articles and read, what the kind of ethos was at that period of time. I don't know if they would be, saying, oh, yeah, we need more locally grounded healing-centered processes. They'd say, no, we need rule of law and strong international systems and whatever else. So this idea of championing healing-centered processes, and these have been happening since conflict has been happening. There have been innovations at the ground level, at the cultural community level, of how to build peace after violence and help the people who are involved feel better. It's just now, I think the international community and funders are starting to say, well, no, this is important and we should be dedicating funding to this. The idea about healing-centered processes, and this is very much part of John Paul Lederach, Lisa Shirk, these conflict transformation people, is that if you bring a population through a healing-centered process, there is not even an option for that kind of violence to occur again. You are fundamentally reordering the social structure and the individual structures. That's the other piece, because if you're able to transform the trauma and build the resilience, people are not caught in trauma brain, which is part of the victim-perpetrator cycle. And we can look at Eastern Mennonite University, STAR model, other models like that, that show that when you're caught in the depths of trauma, internal behaviors or internalization and external behaviors can kind of keep you in that stress spot. If you're able to transform it, the people just are not as aggressive to one another. This is where a lot of peace ethology kind of enters the conversation. So again,
Nick,
I feel like I'm building the plane as I'm flying it a little bit, and us like healing centered folk are like, we don't know exactly what this thing is, but we know it when we see it, and it seems to be working. I feel like, I don't know, Nick Sherwood can sit here and talk about it, and I can write my pretty little papers in my dissertation about it. Until you're in the field and you see people walk into a facilitation and walk out of a facilitation and they are transformed and they're hugging the people that murdered their family members. And maybe in some cases they're saying, I never want to see you again, but in this moment, I forgive you. And then they walk into their lives and they're exercising more and they're going to church more and they're seeing their friends more. And there's a fullness and a richness. That's what the healing center process feels like. And part of back at John Paul Lederach, who again, like, you know, always kind of praising to in his book, The Moral Imagination, he talks about peace building and reconciliation as an eternal mystery. And that's part of the beauty of it. It's complex, it's emergent, and it's mysterious. And so, you know, Andre, you're asking me about what healing center processes are, and I can give you the answer that I would give academic journal articles who want the empirical science and all of that.
But I think you have given us a better answer than that, and it's been absolutely beautiful. And I'm going to stop you there for a second, because I think now it'd be brilliant to open the floor and get the chance to see what has been going in the minds and in the thought processes of our participants in this dialogue. So, you know, guys, you've been listening to us, you've been listening to Nick. As you can see, he's very inspiring. He keeps bringing lots of richness into this, but we want to hear now from you. So any comment or any question or any memory that you would like to bring, this is the moment to start doing so. So I would like to ask you to start putting your hands up so that we can have your questions. And I also saw that Jasmine wrote something on the chat, and I think it was Jasmine. Let me just double check. And it would be great if Jasmine also adventures into actually, instead of having it in the chat, bringing it to this space. So I see 2 hands, please, 3 hands already. So that's great. So we're going to start with Lucia. Lucia, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for what we've been sharing today. That was really, really good. When we just did that exercise with like closing our eyes and like thinking, you know, kind of, I think it was the first time that I considered how it feels like when I feel like I'm healing. That was a really lovely thing to do. Maybe we should do that every time. But also kind of, I remember, so my background is also in psychology, and I remember like kind of discussing with other students when we were studying about kind of the anxiety, how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with like high pressure of different situations. And there's like loads of this exercises you can do in terms of like breathing exercise, meditation, talking to people, exercise, a bunch of things that help you. But actually one of the things that I remember that was sort of advised to us, I don't know whether by a lecture or through a reading, was also like that sometimes when you feel a lot of pressure, when you feel like your mental health is really suffering under like in a specific moment, that the best thing to do is not always to stop and to breathe and to kind of like calm down and to take a break, but actually that action can also be alleviating that sort of crisis that you're feeling. And I was just wondering whether for people who do work in reconciliation, whether on one hand you have sort of their mental health on one hand is affected by the situation in which they're in. But I wonder how much the fact that they get to also be active and doing something to resolve the situation they're in, whether that has also a positive effect on their mental health at the same time. So that was just kind of a thought that I had.
Brilliant, Lucia. Thanks for that. Let's go to Raju now.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. I just came from Alliance for Peacekeeping little gathering, and there was a representative from Liechtenstein and some other European countries, and they were just talking a little bit about bringing in understanding a little bit more about neuroscience.
Yeah.
So I have three small questions for you. One is how time sensitive is it to have the healing-centered reconciliation? Because I'm working with an area in Kashmir with Indians and Pakistanis and Hindus and Muslims and different groups. And I've heard people say to me that it's we rather bury the memory. You know, it's too painful to even bring up. In fact, I could even take some people in the virtual reality, take them back to their home when they were displaced from in Pakistan, or take them back to their homes if they live in Pakistan, in India, where they were displaced. And sometimes they are interested, many times they're not interested because of the emotions and the varied pain. So how time sensitive is the process of the healing-centered reconciliation? Second question is, if the leaders do not have a sense of inner peace or a sense of this process, how does that affect the whole process? Because I know that it takes a tremendous amount of energy on my part to keep my amygdala from being hijacked, from keeping just, neurologically every day, the practices I have to do, meditation and all these different practices just to stay even-handed. But if somebody's in a conflict zone and the leaders are in the conflict zones, if their amygdalas are hijacked, how are they able to be effective in the overall process? Even though everybody else is doing the work, the leaders are struggling. What do they need to be supportive? What support do they need? A third small question is, is restitution included in your healing-centered reconciliation? And if some people are like, well, that happened so long ago, why are we bringing up restitution? It kind of actually can be a conflict between people. So how do you approach the area of restitution when you're working on this and healing-centered reconciliation? Thank you so much. And you're at the tip of an iceberg. What you're doing right now is more valuable than it can be imagined. Thank you.
Brilliant, Raju. Thank you so much for all the thought processes that you're bringing us into the table. Let's go to Frances.
I was wondering sort of how the international community, sort of linked a little bit to also what Raju was saying, about also how the international community can support, because if you've got the practitioners in country, but they're also obviously carrying a lot of trauma, especially if the conflict is ongoing, and how without sort of relying on like sort of funding, which is only short term, but how we can build that kind of network. I'm just thinking of a background in counselling, and you always have like supervision, Obviously, but in an informal way, how we can kind of offer that, because providing sort of psychosocial support to a whole country is an enormous thing, and I think people have sort of grappled with that, how you do it. And secondly, also sort of linked to what Raju was saying, because I did some work with the Columbian Exiles in London about psychosocial support and healing, and a lot of community and cultural events happen, but they wouldn't necessarily recognize that as psychosocial support or healing.
Yeah.
But actually that's huge, and that's sort of I guess that holistic, what we were talking about, that kind of holistic and also the physical as well. And I guess what's my question? Maybe how we kind of build that education as well of psychosocial isn't just the sort of the professional, the one-to-one, or even things like the truth sort of commissions. It's what they're already doing, and
I thank you, Francis. And again, we all not all the time need to put questions on the table, but just bringing that importance of your research on the Truth Commission, I think is really important. I see that Salome has her hand up, but I was going to suggest the following, Salome. Let me hold you for a second, and I hold Jasmine, and we will do another round, because I think there is a lot of things on the table. And of course, Nick is not going to answer all of them, but he's going to tell us where is his thought process going with the different things that have been put on the table. Then we come back to you, all of you guys again. So, Nick, where you are, what do you want to share with us?
So these little questions are like a seminar by themselves. How do I want to respond? Acting better than pausing in the healing space. And my dog is groaning right now, so you might hear a little puppy. Some folks, and I think this is where personality comes in, specifically work on the locus of control, internal locus of control versus external locus of control. Folks with an internal locus of control believe generally that they are able to shape the world around them. Folks with an external locus of control generally believe that their experiences are shaped by the world around them. Some peace builders who I think would exhibit high internal locus of control are definitely getting protective, buffering forces, experiences by taking control of the situation around them and leading the peace processes. Now, folks who are kind of moving a mile a minute, who have a bunch of stuff going on, whether they're executives running a company or peace builders that are going at 90 miles an hour all the time, the literature is quite clear, this is medical health science, that they are experiencing typically higher resting blood pressure, they have telomere decay, they're aging faster, which is where I think the resilience and hardiness conversation comes in, because if you've got a person who's going to be doing the work anyway, figure out ways to protect them, to cocoon them from the deleterious effects of the work. But also kind of pulling back a little bit more, healing itself, this is why it's so individualized. Some people need meditative practices to heal. For some trauma survivors, meditation is re-traumatizing because they're cognitive, they loop back into the moment of trauma. And so this is where healing-centered processes in general hinge on the cultural context, cultural milieu, the given circumstances of the resources around them, what has actually happened with the conflict, and the unique psychologies of all persons involved. So like, this is a crazy permutation that we're trying to build together. These healing-centered processes are based off of the personality of the peace builder, about the resources at the disposal, about the cultural practices, about the individual human beings walking in the world. So it's like a hugely complex endeavor. And again, I'm not here to give answers necessarily. I'm here to just ask more questions. So yeah, interesting about the acting versus pausing and healing. leaders having inner peace. I mean, y'all, when have you worked? Everyone in here has worked for a really bad boss. You worked for a really bad supervisor who was like stressed out and did not value you. And maybe you were doing really cool work. Maybe you were producing really important deliverables, but they didn't see or recognize all of the labor that you were putting into it. And they were kind of unagreeable or disagreeable and whatever. How did that feel? Maybe you were doing some world saving, some peace building, but your supervisor was actually like not fun. I think it's the same thing that happens in the peace building field with reconcilers or whatever. If you have a leader of a movement who is not agreeable and is authoritarian, they might be able to accomplish great things, and their movement might be able to accomplish great things, but it will come at a tremendous human cost for the people that are reporting to them. And this is why reconcilers leading reconciliation processes must be going through the healing themselves. Because I think, I know I don't want to make assumptions about y'all's level of experience within the peace building field, but I think most of us have seen a burned out peace builder, and it can be a really scary thing. One of the books that I want to write one day is The Dark Side of Resilience, the dark side of peace building. Because when you see a super burned out peace builder, and I saw this in the interviews, there is a dark peace builder. They do insanely good work, but all of those social skills, all of that social nuance that they're able to that they have to do their work can be deployed for very nefarious ends. They can become egoic, they can become narcissistic, they can become borderline personality. So we've got to be keeping this in mind, because we're, and I want to be careful not to pathologize peace builders or leaders or social movements or whatever. The fact is they have a tremendous responsibility placed on them, either because they willingly stepped up to the mantle, but in some cases, it was just put on them. They were the only person in a given circumstance that was the right person for the job, or knew all the players in the field or whatever. And you can look at religious texts, wisdom literature that talk about, this idea of the hero that was never supposed to be the hero. They were plucked out of obscurity and they were placed into this super heavy, weird situation. And this is where the religious and spiritual aspects of this whole mosaic are super important as well, because this has been a tale that's been told in cultures and religions for a very long time. Restitution, I am not a transitional justice expert, so I don't want to claim that. I wouldn't want to sit with my colleagues who do work in the restitution and reparation space to figure out, because it's not either or. It's not healing or restitution. It's how they come together in a specific context. I also am I have a tough relationship with the restitution reparation conversation, because I'm from the American South and I grew up in a very, very conservative right-wing family. And for them, you don't talk about slavery. That's just dredging up the past. Yeehaw. Well, there are parts of society that need to, y'all like that accent? There are parts of society that need to talk about it in order to heal. So, how much are we going to be balancing the needs of the descendants of victim survivors versus the needs of the descendants of perpetrators? It's not a one-size-fits-all formula. It's going to take a groupthink of all of these types of people coming together in intentional encounters. We're back to intentional encounters that we talked about, Andre, that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. Time-sensitive healing center processes. I mean, this stuff ideally starts during the conflict. Reconciliation doesn't wait until after the violence is done. You start it during, because if you're able to reconcile groups, the hope is that you're actually engaging in preventative peace building, conflict prevention, conflict mitigation. So, and this is something that Anssi Pentikainen has been talking about, Puffenholz and this whole kind of gang of folks are saying, is reconciliation doesn't just happen at the end of things. It is in media res. It's in the middle of things. It's always in the process. Also, a little bit of a tangent, super interested in this like development in the AI world about creating profiles of people who have died and giving these profiles, these robots, if you want to call them, to the descendants, because I think there is a tremendous role that AI can play in all of this, period. But, you know, I was listening to a podcast, I think it was NPR or Wall Street Journal. They were talking about a reporter whose dad had passed away, and she was interviewing this Bay City exec who had lost their friend and was trying to build basically an AI chatbot that could replicate the friend. But I started thinking, well, like, death is part of the cycle. And doesn't creating AI kind of keep us trapped with ghosts? So again, I don't know, and I'm not an AI specialist, but I don't know. And I'm thinking about this idea of burying the memory that you noted. It is clear, and this is where Freud got stuff wrong. Sometimes the best thing to do is just move on. And this is where I think the difference between reconciliation and peaceful coexistence is really stark, is in some cases, reconciliation would just hurt. It would just cause suffering. And minds far greater than mine are going to be the ones to kind of figure that out. How can the international community support this? Center the needs of peace-building practitioners from the inside. Give them the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they're requesting and that they need. Take them seriously. Understand that just because someone doesn't have a master's degree or a PhD or a whatever, it does not mean they're not brilliant in their own right. When you're working with these individuals, center well-being promotion, resilience building, and trauma healing in all aspects of programmatic design. Make sure that the peace-building teams who work with local practitioners are trained in things related to NHPSS. I have a whole list of how the international community can support.
We will finish today. That's
Yeah.
amazing, Nick.
Yeah.
You've answered all of these questions. Let's go to the second round. I think you've covered all of them. It's been amazing. And I think this tangent on artificial intelligence is just amazing. I mean, I just think that there must be so many food for thought in the minds of people in this moment. But, you know, so let's see where your new ideas have taken people in the room also. And so we'll start with Salome and we will see where we end up. So Salome, over to you.
Thank you. I am currently a student at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm originally from Medellin in Colombia. And before I came to Edinburgh, I was a volunteer at the museum, the House of Memory Museum in Medellin. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time that I've really ever heard about the term insider reconciliators. And I think it's super interesting. And I definitely think that I saw some of these cases while I was working at the museum. And I saw a lot of them, I mean, most of them were women from lower socioeconomic status, and that deeply affected their experiences and their relationships with the conflict. So I was wondering if this was only Colombia, or if this was, you know, this profile was something that we see consistently in post-war processes. And my second question is, how does that well-being that you talked about, Nick, how is it different in Insider Reconcilers than in the normal person who experienced conflict? Like, how is it different for those women that I worked with than it is for me? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salome. That's great. Jasmine, over to you.
Hi, Andrea. Good to see you. And Nick, hi. Nick, thank you so much for everything you were speaking on. It's super relevant to the work the field that I'm in. I'm in the international peace building field. I work for an international NGO called Peace Direct, and the whole point of a lot of our work is to try and, I guess, address some of those issues that you're mentioning around, you know, international development and aid and peace building. And so I just really wanted to echo what you were saying around valuing local and indigenous knowledge, and especially around, you know, cultural practices around healing and reconciliation that exist that you know, a lot of the time through the eyes of, as you kind of made reference to, you know, this kind of Western positivist approach of always looking to scientific methods as a way to kind of, you know, deal with psychosocial problems. And in fact, a lot of the time, you know, local peace builders, especially in their communities, they have these processes and these forms of, you know, providing psychosocial support to begin with. But a lot of the time, those practices are either interrupted by conflict, destroyed by conflict. Often you'll have, you know, one of the kind of weapons of war is to destroy communities and destroy those practices, and they are very effective. And so peace builders are often trying to find ways to bring back those practices, or you know, kind of gather resources to kind of support communities in that way. We work with lots of local peace builders, and at the moment there's a big movement happening in the kind of world of international development and peace building. Just last December, I was in Bogota, actually, in Colombia. Andre, I think I spoke to Sergio briefly about it, but there's something called the Shift the Power Summit. And that was all about bringing, you know, local actors together, like people from, you know, quote global south with people actors from the global north, interacting and speaking to each other with the kind of idea of shifting international power dynamics. But we were bringing local peace builders in to try and speak to these powers. But when you were talking about just seeing burn out local peace builders, it's very true. A lot of the time they're tackling all these barriers around language, around their knowledge not being taken seriously, also learning about log frames and all these different bits of paperwork that they're forced to go through in order to secure the funding and the resource that they need to do the work that is so desperately needed. And then also another layer to that is tackling changing international interests and governmental interests in particular conflicts over others. You know, as things come in and out of the news, interest is lost in particular conflict contexts. And all of that, has such a big strain on the mental health of local peace builders. And so everything you're saying is really relevant. I would love to speak at all of this in more detail at some point. Thank you. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I see that Raju has also, have feelings now to contribute again. So let's listen to Raju. And if anyone else would like to voice one final thing before we wrap up and go back to Nick, so please put your hands up. But for the moment, let's go to Raju.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So my question is, because I heard the word truth and reconciliation come up. Recently in Kashmir, the Supreme Court of India has ruled that they're encouraging a peace and reconciliation process be done in Kashmir. We don't know if it's going to happen. I'm hoping to be a part of that process. I'm initiating a professor at the University of Kashmir to bring it up. He himself is a Muslim, but he is a very non-biased and very helpful to me to work on this process. So the question I have is, with peace and reconciliation, what are the challenges in bringing that forward? Like, does that have to be from the top down? The Supreme Court is saying, you know, you need to do this, or can there be a bottom up process that meets the top down process? So it's just a question. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Raju. And I think with that, Nick, we will get back to you. I think as we've seen today, it's been amazing. We have practitioners, students, we have, many of the different sectors of different societies across the world engaging in this I would say, global dialogue.
Yeah.
And so your thoughts on, these questions that have been put on the table would be very useful in the next 5 to 6 minutes, Nick. I know that is challenging, but just share.
Andre, we lost you. But I'm going to go ahead 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, I've got a 500-page book to summarize in 500 minutes. 5 minutes. Okay. First, question of gender, socioeconomic status, and age. Okay, so the 41 people that we interviewed that became the basis of my dissertation, I believe 27 were women. This is not a global representative sample. This was a convenient sample of people in our networks who were working as insider reconcilers. So, the gender breakdown was definitely in the sample that we had, but I want to put a heavy caveat there. The insider reconcilers that I have met with are typically older, 50 and above, women working either in the caring professions, education, ministry, social work, counseling, etc. I suspect in communities where women more often stay at home than not, they are seeing the daily ramifications in their lives, their families' lives, their children's lives, their neighbors' lives of what war and conflict does. And when you are confronted in the daily, day in and day out, all the time with the realities of war, I do think that becomes a powerful motivator in some people to do something about it. I think there's also a social conditioning aspect to this as well. Women who are caretakers, and I mean, I don't know if this falls across all cultures or whatever, but there's some cool social personality research out there that shows that caretakers in general, irrespective of gender, actually, caretakers in general have higher social skills. Social skills are a requisite in many cases, not all, of being a peace builder. So I think there's also a social conditioning thing that comes into this as well. SES, looking at the data is noisy on that, so I don't want to make a claim there. I have seen super affluent people who have the financial freedom to not work a 9 to 5, go and do this work. I've also seen people who choose careers. This is kind of me, solid middle class, choose careers hinging on peace building work. I've also seen very low SES people actually in Athens, Georgia, doing the anti-racist work. They do this work because they're piecing together funding from a church or from a program or from a whatever. This idea of poor peace builders is definitely real from what I've seen. And I think that there's a lot of tension between the elite global civil society peace building and the local poor grassroots peace builders. John Paul Lederach talked about this. In his model of the pyramid of action is elite at the top, hybrid, middle range in the middle, and then grassroots at the bottom. Again, it's not either or, it's both and. It's how you create cross-sectional peace-building movements that loop together all of these different people. But Salome, if you want to do some follow-up research, let me know. That sounds like a really cool study. Indigenous approaches to peace building. I mean, we need to take very seriously this idea that part of the war industry destroys indigenous healing processes. And this is where healing-centered processes very much can be considered a decolonial, anti-racist, critical approach to peace building, which I know we're in the critical dialogue. We're looping it all together here. I think that the idea that peace building heals and should heal people is fairly radical. It's not up to policymakers anymore, right? It's not up to these neoliberal power institutions. We've taken the power out of their hands, and now we're saying, no, it's the soft voices in society where this is kind of sitting and resting. And it's empowering school teachers who make no money, counselors who make no money, religious leaders who make no money, right? I think there's something there that this idea of the elite UN mediator, whatever, we're saying no, actually true transformation happens at different levels, different places of society. Again, it's not either or, it's both and. Challenges of bringing about, recently I heard healing is not a soft skill. Damn right, it is hard. It is so hard. The challenges of bringing forth the TRC, this is a much longer conversation, but I'll close by saying this. Healing is a universal human experience. It's something that we hopefully all it happens to us at some point in our lives. And it's also, healing is not just something that happens to us. It's something that we actively shape and participate in. The days of peace building being owned by elite NGOs, UN, EU, US, those days are over. I think paradigm shifts of this sort always create aftershocks. I suspect that as the peace building field needs to grapple with our multipolar world, with the backsliding of democracies, with climate change, with COVID, with whatever, we're looking at a very different world now than 2015, than 2019. And I think this is just going to keep accelerating, right? We had the comment earlier about, is healing moving or is it pausing and resting? It is iterations of both. And I think in a world where our human experience is often kind of unfettered acceleration, I think that's where the pause comes in. I'm going to wrap it up with this. Paulo Freire and other critical, I knew I was going to get a smile out of you, Andre. Paulo Freire and these other, for me, giants who are founded really the participatory action community's participatory way of doing research. They were the ones who said praxis is action and reflection. It's a little bit of both. And that through multiple iterations of praxis, we can actually kind of start to see society for what it is and try to make changes and make things better. For me, the Nick Sherwood practice of doing research and Nick Sherwood practice of healing center processes and supporting insiders is part of that action and reflection. Understanding that whenever we walk into a space, we bring with us the weight of the history of our lives and the ancestors that came before us. We bring with us our traumas and little neuroses. We also bring with us nobility of spirit and our capacity to change and transform the spaces around us. That is oftentimes a very burdening idea and a burdening way of doing the work. And a lot of peace builders are afraid of that. And a lot of funders quite simply don't understand that. I think to address the massive challenges that our world is facing right now and will continue to face, we need to understand that solutions are not going to happen tomorrow. They're going to be multi-generational. This creates a tough thing because that means Nick Sherwood is not going to see the eradication of climate change in my lifetime, but I still need to recycle and I still need to get an electric car and I still need to whatever. I think that the best shot the human species in our world, species outside of the human, is by empowering local peace builders, listening to the wisdom that they bring with them and the deep knowledge of healing that different cultures around the world have figured out oftentimes millennia ago. It is the integration of all these perspectives, I think, that is going to be our best hope.
Nick, thank you so much. It's been a total privilege to have you here today. I think first, thank you, and thank you all for creating this pool of meaning or stream of meaning. It's taken us in really incredible directions. I'm pretty sure that we somehow sensed that this was going to create new understandings, new ideas, that we were going to talk about different things, but we really didn't know where we were going to end up. The first thing, and I want to make probably sort of 3 or 4 points for us to continue thinking about that, because of course, a dialogue doesn't end when the dialogue ends. A dialogue is a process of continue to think together and take these ideas, you to your house and continue connecting this. And the brilliant thing of having this dialogue with Nick is that he's building, I mean, it somehow is like creating this incredible puzzle, because Nick has been working with Karl Stauffer, who was here talking about the ecosystem of reconciliation, with Simon Keys, who was talking about metaphor and reconciliation, you know, with Tanya Pachensol, who has been working on perpetual peace building, you name it. So this is like creating this beautiful sort of puzzle of global creative, critical dialogues on reconciliation. But three ideas that stay in my head, and a big question that I think is something that probably we should tackle in a next critical dialogue on reconciliation. First thing is that Nick has been very clear to show us that there is a paradigm shift happening in the peace building and reconciliation field. And this paradigm shift is focusing on healing. Mental health and healing is the new sort of big shift that is happening in front of our eyes, and of which Nick is part of. And so it's been brilliant for us to continue thinking about what does it mean, and how do we strengthen, and how do we want to work, and what are going to be the big debates of healing-centered reconciliation process. The second, I think, really important idea that was left of this space is that this paradigm shift has a really powerful decolonial dimension, because it's based on the wisdom of insider reconcilers. It's based on the wisdom of people who understand health as something that goes beyond, you know, like having the good heart rate or not having a cold or, you know, running every now and then, but it's about how do we connect with our environment and live a sustainable, calm, easygoing, relaxed life. So, and this comes from the wisdom of people that actually Nick made it very clear, sometimes are the first victim of war and sometimes are not taken seriously by the international community because they are not experts as the international community wants to see them, and they don't follow the log frames in the way that the international community and the liberal peace paradigm wants to see it. So the healing transformation in the peace building field is a decolonial approach. It's challenging the conventional, which is amazing. Thanks, Nick, for that. I think is something that we will continue thinking about it. The third point, it is this beautiful idea again of insider reconcilers. They are the ones leading the way because they are the ones who can convey this, if I understood it correct, these multi-stakeholder dialogues. Multi-stakeholder dialogues with the people who are working on transitional justice and more restitution things, people who are working more on the area of development, perhaps, people who are even thinking on the side of technology, and is sort of these inside reconcilers have a really interesting and beautiful capacity to integrate, to have a holistic vision, and they can really lead the way on this new era of healing centered reconciliation processes. Now, the big question for me that I think stays here comes from this tangent that Nick put on the table, and is what is it going to be the role of artificial intelligence in all of this? We are going through a very radical technological shift that we still don't understand. Last week, I finished this book called The Digital Ape. The digital ape is the next version of Homo sapiens. So we're pretty much living in a robotic, cybernetic environment. And as Nick was mentioning, now we're not even trying to bury our dead, but we try to keep them alive in robots. So how is this artificial intelligence gonna have an healing? I think it's a tremendous challenge and a question that we should start thinking about it, and remains as a big curious idea in my head. With that in mind, I would like to ask you all to open your microphones if you can, and clap to you and to Nick in particular for inspiring this incredible conversation. And I hope we see you all again in the next critical dialogue on reconciliation.
We did it. Well done, everyone. And yeah, my LinkedIn and email are in the chat. Hit me up. Let's make some magic together. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Nick, if you agree,
Have you
I'd
stopped the
send-
recording, my dear Lucia?
yeah.